Traditionally, we've all come to subscribe to a pretty simple story about success, that the best leaders are cool and calm and confident and collected. They can walk into any room with certainty, make the necessary decisions, and sleep just fine at night. But what if that story is just flat out wrong? And it probably is. What if some of the most driven, high-performing, successful people that you know, the ones running companies, leading teams, building careers, being famous, are also battling with anxiety, sometimes to crippling degrees? Not only that, what if anxiety is actually part of their success engine? Because here's what's interesting. Anxiety doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like over-preparation, hyper-responsibility, relentless thinking, a voice that says, this could go horribly wrong, so I'd better be ready. Those aren't necessarily bad things, particularly in a workplace. For a long time, we've treated these voices in our head as a flaw, something to manage or suppress or hide, especially when we're at work. But today's guest argues something much more radical, that anxiety, when understood and channeled, can actually become a leadership advantage. Morra Aarons-Mele is the author of The Anxious Achiever and the host of a very popular Harvard Business Review podcast, The Anxious Achiever. She spent years exploring, including within herself, what it really looks like to succeed while anxious and how more leaders can stop fighting their minds and start working with them. This isn't going to be a conversation about eliminating anxiety. It's going to be about redefining it. I'm J.R. Lowry. This is Career Sessions. Morra, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Yeah, good to meet you. I was just mentioning before we started that I really enjoyed your book and looking forward to talking about it. So you write about anxiety and you challenge the idea that anxiety is something that should be fixed. What led you to reframe it as something that people can actually use to their advantage or maybe even turn into something resembling a superpower?
You know, it's funny. I was just doing a session yesterday for a big global law firm, and I, in a poll question, said, how many of you have felt anxious in the last 24 hours? And 84% of them said they had felt anxious in the last 24 hours.
Now, I would have thought it would be 100% in a law firm.
I know. I'm like, who's that 16%? And so I think there's the fact that anxiety is part of the human condition. And actually, anxiety is a really helpful and useful emotion and a necessary emotion. We're going to feel it whether we like it or not, so we might as well understand it and use it. Then there's the fact that in my work, interviewing high achievers who manage mental health challenges, who are neurodivergent, who have faced traumas and other challenges that sort of impact our brain and our psyche, I couldn't believe how many of them said to me, anxiety is my superpower. And they would say, I'm not saying it's comfortable and that I love it and that it makes me a necessarily happy person, but it's an essential key to who I am. It powers me. It drives me. It causes me to seek new things. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that, even though, as I always say, it's a double-edged sword.
What is it that distinguishes people who you call anxious achievers from, I'll say, the everyday run-of-the-mill person who's just stressed out about something?
Anxious achievers are a very special type of people. And I would say that almost anxiety is like their oxygen, right? They're powered by anxiety, often since they were kids. It's a way of being, and it's a little bit of a habit. An anxious achiever tends to be someone who is maybe an overthinker, who's always 4 steps ahead, who's kind of never stopping, who just busts through milestones and keeps going in that sort of relentless way. And the ambition, the achievement can be powered by a lot of different drives, but the anxiety is used as a motivating fuel to keep going.
So these people who think of it as a superpower, what are some of the specific ways that they use it to their advantage?
There's a lot of specific ways, and some will surprise you and some won't. So an example is that anxious achievers always say that they are worriers. They are looking ahead for threats. Many of them are what psychologists would call hypervigilant. They are scanning the environment for threats and preparing, which is actually, when you think about it, in many workplaces and in many professions, something that is highly rewarded. I would imagine in your past careers, the ability to be 4 steps ahead and anticipating multiple scenarios and how we might get out of them is a key facet of an anxious achiever. And it's extremely exhausting because your nervous system is always aroused in a threat state. So again, double-edged sword, but it keeps you that person who's always looking ahead, who's always thinking. Very, very motivated by goals and tasks, because goals and tasks feel very, very weighty to an anxious achiever. There's like a lot of my identity riding on it, my self-worth, my perfectionism riding on achieving tasks. We're often very motivated by money fear and scarcity. And so we will work very, very, very hard to provide money and make sure there's financial security. At the bottom of all of this behavior is the need for control that a lot of anxious achievers feel. We feel that if only we keep control over things and keep trying hard and hard and harder, things will be okay. But some of the more surprising aspects are that I find that anxious achievers can be very empathetic. They are deeply attuned to other people. They are extremely creative because they're seekers. I interviewed a script writer, and she said, I can go to Target and I'm attuned to everyone else's behavior, and I'll have 4 ideas for different storylines and scripts just by noticing things and tuning into the shoppers at Target. And so we have a lot of radar going on. So we can also have really good social skills as well, because again, we're very focused on the other person.
So for leaders who see their anxiety as a liability, how do you help them shift their mindset?
I try to help them at a few different levels. I should say that I'm not a psychologist. I am not a therapist. I really recommend that they are in therapy. I think the mindset shift is that a lot of anxious achievers, and actually a lot of us in general, are really used to being our own worst enemies. There's an incredible quote that I love from a sports psychologist that I know, and he says, at the highest level of performance, people are often their own worst enemies. And I think that that's really true. And I think that a lot of us use our inner critic. We almost bully ourselves. A lot of anxious achievers do this too. We kind of bully ourselves into performance. And the key is to stop being your own worst enemy and kind of turn into your own best friend and stop trying to change who you are. Obviously, if your anxiety is getting in the way of your life, it needs to be treated. But many anxious achievers are on medication. They've been in therapy, they meditate, they practice all the modalities that help, and they still have that nature. I joke that we kind of vibrate at an 11. And my point is, that's a beautiful and essential part of who you are. And like all things, right? Like all of our strengths, we have a shadow side.
Yeah.
So the key is learning to have a relationship with your anxiety. And I use a lot of mindfulness techniques for that. And understanding that it's not in control of you, but you can't control it. That it's a relationship and a dialogue that you will get more agency over. But the first thing is accepting it.
In the book, you talk about how a lot of this goes back to childhood issues, childhood trauma, childhood memories. How can somebody unpack that and use it to help in a practical way?
I mean, there's a great saying, right? Wherever you go, there you are. And I think that by the time you get to a certain age, hopefully you've done enough reflection that you realize, gosh, I didn't come from a radish, as my father used to say. And the thing that's so interesting about work is that workplaces are systems, just like families are systems. And when we grow up in families, we all play a role. There's a big thing on the internet now, the kind of eldest daughter syndrome. And I'll use that one because I'm definitely eldest daughter, eldest daughter of a single mom. There is the sense that as eldest daughter of a single mom, you grow up hyper competent. So many of my anxious achievers are the eldest child, especially of single parents or parents who really struggled. And you fix things. You solve things. You are probably mature before your time. You learn that you are competent and that you have a role in making things better. Well, guess what happens when you show up to work? You're that person, which is, of course, could be extremely rewarding and extremely draining. And also ultimately not great for your leadership, because at the end of the day, leadership is not about fixing things for other people. It's about bringing people together so that they can create solutions and you can guide. And so I think that it's really interesting. Wherever you go, there you are. I met so many anxious achievers who come from alcoholic families, who come from families with significant trauma, who grew up themselves with a learning difference or ADHD, in which they felt that they were constantly compensating or overcoming something with drive and with achievement, right? With getting the gold stars. And those patterns stay with us until we do the work to ask, are you serving me? Do I want to be this anymore? Or can I dial it back?
Yeah. And obviously, you talked earlier about needing to manage this relationship with anxiety and accepting the fact that you may never be able to fully control it, but needing to get more control over it. How do you work with people to develop the right kind of self-awareness without falling into a pattern of obsessing about it so much that that becomes a source of their anxiety?
I think what I do is helpful to anybody. And I have a very, very basic technique that I start with people. And it's so simple, but it starts with helping them notice. And then I teach them what I call my two-step, which is basically to pause and then to ask. So it's a 3-part process. It's based in mindfulness. It's based in something called ACT therapy. And the key is that we all, whether we're an anxious achiever or we're just going through a hard time, we carry stress and anxiety with us in our bodies. We have certain behaviors. It's almost like your tell in poker. I don't know about what yours is. If you're feeling stressed and anxious, what's your warning signal?
Well, sleep is harder. I have a harder time falling asleep when I'm feeling that way. And I think the second thing is I kind of go into almost like pulling the proverbial hoodie over my head and just kind of in blinders on, head down, just keep plowing through.
I would say that that's a really common reaction. And, for me, I get a twitch in my eye. It took me many years to understand that. I've had people say that they start getting tinglings in their arms. Like, you have to learn to tune in. A simple way to start to do it is literally during your workday, maybe once in the morning, once at lunch, once in the afternoon, once at the end of the day, once before a meeting that you have frequently. Just take a sec and close your eyes and feel your body, where you're holding tension, where you feel stuck, where you feel pain. There's often in our lives a meeting that makes us feel a certain way. I've worked with so many senior executives who've said, God, every week before I have to have my one-on-one with my boss, I have a migraine, or I feel like I'm going to throw up, or I don't sleep well. These are all signals. And the tuning in is the first step. When you start putting your head down, a lot of people will say, when I start micromanaging people, when I need to know what everyone's doing all the time, these are signals. And the key is not to blame yourself. The key is to be like, okay. And then when you notice that you're feeling these feelings or you're doing this behavior, to pause for a minute. And I like to teach people very simple grounding techniques so that they can calm their body, come into the present moment, and then really to ask themselves, what do I need? What's going on here? Yep. And that could be as simple as maybe I'm hungry, maybe I'm thirsty, maybe I need to go outside and get some air, maybe I need to put down the laptop for a little bit. Or it could be, why is this meeting making me feel like this is the end of the world? What's going on? That deeper inquiry. That's the process that starts building mindfulness that gives you that ability to, before you act out your anxiety, pause, interrogate it a little bit, and then choose a path forward.
Well, there's a related point around just the fiction sometimes, the negative self-talk that runs in our head that sometimes is truthful and sometimes is fictional. And a lot of times I think something may trigger us and trigger a feeling of anxiety, but we have to really almost pull a thread to figure out what's really driving that? Why am I upset about this situation? Why am I upset that somebody loaded the dishwasher wrong? Why am I upset that somebody's a minute late to a meeting? What's really the underlying reason? When you're working with your clients or giving talks on this, how do you suggest to people that they really deal with the negative self-talk and the thought traps that they can fall into?
That really is the work of therapy and inquiry, because that stuff can run very deep and that stuff can be interlaced with trauma and really hard things. I think that my role as a coach is very much around the behavior and the grounding and the mindfulness.
Hmm.
But I think that those very deep questions are actually worth investing in yourself. I call it self-understanding. And I think that the process of self-understanding is the greatest leadership gift we can give ourselves, which is understanding how we got where we are, the stories we tell ourselves, our patterns. It's understanding our personality. Am I an introvert? Am I an extrovert? Right? Am I conscientious? Am I a little bit neurotic? And it's understanding our neurotype, which is something my next book is about. And it's putting that puzzle of us together so that we can create optimal situations. To me, like that's the biggest gift you can give yourself for other people as well.
You talked earlier about the fact that people who come into work and want to solve all the problems because that's what they did as kids, that is often rewarded, but it's also often exhausting, which kind of brings us to the topic of boundaries, which you talk about being a big issue for a lot of anxious achievers. How do you help people figure out how to set their boundaries?
Setting boundaries is really hard. And it's funny, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I used to talk about boundaries in talks. And then I found that I would start getting, it was like their eyes rolling at me. Like, come on, I don't have the ability to set my boundaries. Like, stop promising, stop teasing me because you don't work here. You don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I get it. We live in a world where boundaries are very, very challenging. So I think it's important to know your boundaries. And I think it's important to also understand. I was talking with Frances Fry and Ann Morris, and they said to me, nobody is going to protect your boundaries for you. No one cares about your boundaries if you don't set your own. And that's why I really try to teach people to understand their limits. What are my limits? Limits are like the hard and fast lines that help us protect our boundaries. And so maybe a limit for me is I can't do 6 Zooms a day because that fries my brain. Maybe a limit for me is around the amount of travel I do. Maybe it's a time-based limit. And then the key is how do I protect my limit without losing power and status? And that's really where the magic is. But I think even just understanding your personal boundaries and how they affect you gives you a little more agency over feeling less violated by them. Because, for example, I have a funny boundary, which is that if people start to tell me what to do and order me around too much, I get very, very angry. And I've done a lot of therapy, and I know that this boundary is about my stepfather. And I have like an irrational response to it, sometimes even inappropriate. And that's a boundary that I understand. And it's a boundary that it's hard to set limits around. And I'm okay with that because now I know. I'm like, Morra, this is your thing. This is not about the client. It's about your past. Let this go. So sometimes even understanding it is powerful.
Yeah. And look, I'm certainly cognizant of the fact that you can't always get people to honor your boundaries at work. But if you don't articulate them, then they're never going to be honored. And
That's right.
you have to at least try, I think, if it's really important to you. And certainly when you are hitting something that is really like a hard limit in the way that you were just describing it, you really have to make sure that people understand that, because that's when things can go really bad, really off track. And you don't want that to happen for your sake or for your relationship with them.
That's right. And the other thing is you can do it from a position of strength. My new book is for what I call atypical achievers, a lot of whom would identify as neurodivergent. And this is a big deal because, for example, if you really cannot work under fluorescent lights, if they really overtax your nervous system, that is a really hard limit for you that is going to impact your performance. That has a very easy solution. Turn off the lights. Things like that are really essential to performance and survival, I think you have to own in a position of strength. Like, I need this to be the best I can be, and I can be really good.
I think those are hard situations. If you work in an office that's full of fluorescent lights, I mean, essentially it means they need to create a dedicated space for you. And in some situations, the company's not going to be willing to do that. And then you get into a legal wrangle of whether they're obligated to do that. And I don't really know how those situations play out because there has to be some sort of reasonable middle ground. But when you are living with those circumstances, obviously it really does matter to you. It's hard. I don't think there's an easy solution in those cases.
Yeah, because the solution can feel very stark for people, right? Under the ADA, you are entitled to reasonable accommodation if you cite a disability. So if you cite a disability, they've got to fix it. On the other hand, many people won't do that because they feel that they'll be punished if they say that they have a disability. But at the end of the day, maybe you can just turn off the fluorescent lights above your cubicle. I think that we as teammates, as workers, have to get much more comfortable with the fact that we all work differently and we
Yeah.
need different things to thrive. And that's okay.
So let's talk a little bit about the team and the organizational part of this. What's a mentally healthy team or organization look like to you?
Mentally healthy team, I think, is a team that does have the ability to understand the conditions that they need to thrive and is able to ask for it without shame or fear of punishment. So that's really important. There's something called psychosocial safety factors at work.
Right.
And I think it's really important to understand that this isn't someone being difficult. I'll give you an example. My daughter was having a lot of math anxiety, and I just met with her teacher, and her teacher said, I noticed that when she is seated among a lot of other kids and she sees other kids get up and with their finished tests and go hand them into the teacher, she gets really anxious and she kind of freezes. And what I decided to do is two things. One, nobody gets up when their test is done. They just turn their paper over and read or sit quietly. And two, I seated your daughter in a corner so her line of sight is removed from other people finishing their work.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's amazing. Like, what a simple thing to do that really, I think, helps everybody. We can all relate to that feeling of we're still trying to finish the test and everyone's getting up. It's a terrible feeling. And I think
Getting up early and walking out of the room is a bit of power play.
It's a total flex. And doesn't mean you got a better grade on the test, by the way. And I think that that is really also about psychological safety, the ability to be who I am,
Sure.
to ask for what I want, to push people, to question without fear of being punished. And so to me, that's also really based in an understanding that we are a group of individuals with different skills, with different strengths, with different quirks, with different needs who need to come together and work as a team. And we have the ability to do that and figure it out like grown-ups.
Yeah, I'll say again, I think a lot of this is hard in a practical sense. And I've watched this play out. I've had situations where there's been a lot of asks put into the group that on their own are very reasonable, that are reflective of what people need to be at their best at work. When you pile them all together, it almost becomes too weighty for that team to even manage. And I think those are really difficult situations to work through, particularly when you're the manager, because you want to honor what everybody needs individually. But when you look at it all collectively, you're like, there's no way we're going to be able to succeed.
Mm-hmm. It's really hard. And that's why I think there has to be compromise on both sides. I mean, they call it work for a reason, right? So I think that we all have to be reasonable, but that's why I encourage people to figure out their non-negotiables. What's a nice to have and what's a must have. I have this framework that I call mentally healthy leadership that isn't team-based, but it creates really healthy teams. And the first pillar is self-understanding, which is showing up, understanding my past, my personality, my nature, my neurotype, like what makes me, what makes me thrive, and what makes me struggle. And then the second piece is emotional flexibility. And this is what you're getting at. Emotional flexibility is the ability to name an emotion, to identify it, and to manage it appropriately in the moment. And sometimes that is saying, I'm going to take one for the team. It's okay. This triggers me. This makes me upset. It's hard for me, but I'm here for the team. And that's a really important skill. I think the hard thing is that most of us, if we're not taught that, so we act out our emotions, and that makes situations like you're describing like way harder because all of a sudden they become fraught. So emotional flexibility is so key. The third pillar is stress literacy, understanding what stress is, what your body feels like when it's under stress, and how to identify good stress versus harmful stress. It's really understanding the nervous system. Again, if teams understood that, we would remove so much complexity. And then the fourth is mindfulness, is really being able to come into the present moment, to focus on what's at hand, to be present and pay attention. And in my perfect world, we'd all have those skills and all of the things we're talking about would be easier.
So those are some of the things at the team level. At the broader organizational level, what are some of the things that you would like to see, or some of the things that you advise your corporate clients to do to help better position anxious achievers to be at their best, but also create a mentally healthy construct in the organization?
I think it's really hard because the incentives are so misaligned with mental health in every way in most workplaces right now. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think we took some steps forward at COVID time, and then we took some steps right back.
I would agree. So what's really sad for me to say right now is that as much as I want companies to create the infrastructure, have access to therapy, pay people well, have benefits, all of those things companies need to do, the incentive structure that companies create is almost antithetical to well-being for many, many people, not less the threat of AI. Every time I read about a company who's threatening layoffs because of AI or having people teach AI how to do their jobs, it is extremely hard to have any kind of well-being in an environment like that. That is literally placing you under threat. And so I find myself more and more coaching individuals almost to survive versus how do we create systems and organizations that allow people to thrive. Companies, I think, want to do that, but the market forces against them are so hard. I don't actually have a good answer for that. Maybe you do.
Yeah, I've had more conversations certainly recently with people who are feeling the same sense of unease about the direction of travel in the corporate world. Part of it AI related and part of it just more general.
Yeah.
And the sense that, below the top level of the company, life gets really hard really quickly. You're constantly under threat of losing your job. We want to hollow out the middle management layers. I was talking to somebody yesterday about ageism in the workplace. There's a lot of things I think that really work against healthy workplaces. They may be financially healthy, but they're not emotionally healthy or societally healthy. And that, I think, is one of the big tensions right now in the corporate world is we're indexing really hard on one dimension, and it feels like it's been at the other dimensions. And if you're an individual in those situations, even if you are an emotionally healthy individual, it's hard. If you are an emotionally challenged person, anxious or in whatever other form, I think it's really, really hard.
It's really, really hard. And I think that the best work you could do right now is to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's such a cliche, but really focusing on your locus of control, trying not to catastrophize,
Yeah.
really investing in that. And I will say that there's a lot of companies doing a lot of things. I think so much magic can happen at the team level that if I was companies, and I'm obviously not, I think really helping managers because managers are very overloaded. They don't have enough resources. But smart companies understand that the magic happens at the team level. And how do I empower managers to create great teams? I think that's the answer.
Yeah. Beyond the level of a small company, you are going to have some level of middle management. I mean, I know we've got this dream, and there are a few small examples of it where like one or two people can run these gigantic companies, and they're doing it all with third parties and automation and all of that. And that's a bit of the tech nirvana. And then you've got other companies where the senior person may have 20, 30 people reporting to them, and it's a very flat structure. But there is a limit to that. And once you hit that limit, then you need layers in between. And once you've got those layers in between, you've got an obligation to make sure that they have the conditions that they need to succeed. I feel like what happens a lot of times is as soon as we've got that layer, we start complaining about them. And at the end of the day, it's not really helpful because what's the alternative? I mean, you can obviously upgrade your talent in that layer. You can train them and try and develop them, but just pointing fingers and blaming them for all of the ills of the organization seems to be what a lot of executive level people have a tendency to do. And that doesn't solve any problems for anybody.
There's not much compassion, basic human empathy. And I think that that's really unfortunate. There's an amazing concept called spaciousness that I love very much. It's Dr. Megan Reitz. And one of her big points is that when humans have no space at work, it's really hard to do our best work. It's hard to be kind to each other. It's hard to be thoughtful. It's hard to make good decisions. It's hard to take care of ourselves. And that the mere idea of injecting some space into your day is really, really profound. And often I think, God, if we just if we just cut back a little, it gave people back a little more space, what would happen?
So just bringing this back to an individual level, what thoughts would you want to leave somebody with who hears all of this and identifies as a person who has a level of anxiousness, whether they call it anxiety or not, feels like they're an achiever? What advice would you want to leave them with in terms of how to manage this as best they can and make the most of it?
Yeah, I would say the key is not to try to cure yourself, not to try to change yourself, but to simply sit with it and ask, is this serving me? Is this how I want to live? Or is there a piece of me that feels like I might want to do something different? And if that's the answer, there are ways, but you don't have to give up that essential, hard thinking, overthinking, achieving, driven piece of yourself. You really don't, but you could do it with a little bit more ease. Like it doesn't have to be as expensive.
Yeah. Well, thank you for today. And thank you for writing your book. I'm sure that it is something that resonates with a lot of people. I know you talk about this topic on your own podcast as your theme. And so there's clearly a massive audience of people who this is really resonating with and who can relate to the work that you're doing and the things that you bring to bear in your book and your podcast and your speaking engagements. So thank you for all of that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, JR.
All right. Really interesting conversation with Morra, and something that I think a lot of you can probably relate to, because a lot of us struggle with anxiety, at least at some level, and feel like it's something that is an advantage, but is also something that probably gets in our way at times as well. And so one thing to take away is that anxiety isn't the enemy. Misunderstanding it is. If you try to eliminate anxiety, you're going to lose the parts of you that you care deeply about, the things that allow you to think ahead and push for excellence and bring detailed focus to things. And the goal isn't to get rid of those things. It's about how to learn how to make it work for you instead of against you. Second thing is just this idea of self-awareness, and self-awareness as opposed to self-control. If we're so controlling in the way that we behave, whether at work or outside of work, it's exhausting. Trying to power through anxiety, it is exhausting. So the real shift needs to be in understanding your patterns and your triggers and your thought loops, and sometimes the fiction that your mind is telling you, so that you can respond intentionally and intelligently as opposed to reacting automatically with that amygdala part of your brain. Third is that your coping strategies might be a constraint: overworking, perfectionism, people-pleasing, micromanagement. These things might feel like strengths, although micromanagement probably wouldn't, but they're often anxiety in disguise. And so at some point, what can help you can also start holding you back. And then finally is just coming back to this idea of teams and organizations. The most effective teams and leaders and organizations model honesty and authenticity and imperfection, not perfection. And so you can't build strong teams by pretending to be fearless and pretending that nobody's got things going on in their lives or nobody has worries. You build them by creating environments in which people can be human, they feel psychologically safe, they can manage their emotions, and they can still perform at a high level. So the goal isn't to become less anxious. The goal is to become a better leader with anxiety if you have anxiety. I invite you to subscribe to Career Sessions on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube. And if you found this discussion enlightening, sign up for my membership community, which is called Pathwise, and subscribe to our newsletter, Path Wisdom. Thanks. See you next time.